Okay, well, it is 9 o'clock, so we will call this committee meeting of the investigative committee together. Thank you for joining us. So we do have a quorum. We've got Brenda on the phone. Can you hear us okay, Brenda?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. And we can hear you. So we've got Brenda on the phone and Adri here. So we've got a quorum. So we're called to order. We'll review on-site packet. Does
Madam Chair, there was one that was sent to you. It's to be reviewed under quasi judicial.
okay. And then these additional handouts that you've provided us, did Brenda get these as well?
She will.
She will get
She will get these here.
We do have an addition to the agenda, so we will be adding an executive session. We're going to add that closer to the end. So any other additions or revisions to the agenda?
Oh, we do. Are you ready for that motion?
I don't have any other additions.
Okay. So Adri Goldsmith, board member, I move to approve the agenda as amended with addition of an executive session and a date change on our minutes from the last time to 3/24 of 25.
This is Brenda Sharp, second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying yes.
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 Any opposed signify by saying no. Motion carries. Okay, Linda, would you like to do announcements?
Yes, Madam Chair and committee members, we have a new nurse investigator, Sarah Busby. She joined us last Monday, so she's just been her second week now starting. So we're excited to have her.
Welcome. We're glad you're here. Absolutely. All right.
Welcome, Sarah.
All right. So I think you were given a copy of the minutes, and we know we need to make an amendment to that date on there. It's actually March 24th instead of the 25th, but
We did that with this one, so I just went ahead with the amendment there that we had.
okay, we will have to have a motion to approve the
So
minutes
we'll
as
do it
well.
again.
Yeah.
Okay, I move to approve the minutes of March 24th, 25 investigation committee as written.
Brenda Sharp, second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying yes.
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 Any opposed signify by saying no. The motion carries. Okay. So we'll go on to unfinished business. We're talking about monitoring interruptions, and this has come up several times. So I think we're gonna hear from, I apologize. We're going to hear from you. Are you from KNAP?
I am from KNAP.
I'm sorry,
Okay.
I don't know your name.
Stephanie, I'm sorry.
You're here to visit with us about monitoring interruptions, is that right?
I think so. I guess I don't really know where to start with, but there's been a lot of increase in participants wanting to do international travel. And it came to our attention earlier this year. Linda and I were emailing about monitoring interruptions because she's like, I feel like there's a whole bunch more. And we realized that per the contract, we were not supposed to be doing monitoring interruptions for like travel, for like personal vacations. Not meaning that they can't go on personal vacations within the United States, because they can still check in, they can still go do a drug test if they need to. And we always test them more stringently when they get back anyways. But this international travel has really blown up. And so I've been working with Rachel about coming up with an addendum. We've added something to our contract. There's a specific in the United States travel, and then there's the international travel section about like we need to have 4 months notification so we can get it to the board, whether they're a known or an unknown, because if they're unknown it has to be approved by the KNAP board. And so we've just added some language about international travel and that they will then have to sign an addendum, and Rachel and I are still working on, excuse me, this is a sample addendum, but we're working on finalizing an addendum for everyone. I don't know what else.
I think what's come up for us is that to your point, yes, they are increasing a lot.
A lot.
And some of the licensees are securing travel, paying for it, and these are not, I mean, it's not small dollars, they're big dollars
Yes.
that these folks are paying out prior to having the approval.
Yes.
And so I think from my perspective, Adri, Brenda, you need to speak up. I think it's important that when someone's entering KNAP, they understand that for international travel, particularly for known cases and also unknown cases, the known cases are obviously the ones that I'm more aware of, that limitation is there and that it will be enforced.
Yeah.
And there's been several educational opportunities through NCSBN where there's been conversations about successful rehabilitation. And that's not an easy process. Many times it takes, I think one of the studies we saw up to 9 or 10 times even to go through that process to be successful. And by granting those exposures to social substances that may have them, recycle back through their addiction is honestly what we're trying to avoid. And so it's putting the board in an awkward position when the money's been spent, they're assuming this is already done. They think that because it's associated with a high school or because it's associated with a family member, a grandparent or something like that, they feel like that's justified. And I think that's our request from this committee, is to have that emphasized when someone enters KNAP, that that's not going to be okay for the 1, 2, 3 year commitment that they're signing up for.
Yeah, and like I said, before we changed the language in the contract, there was one sentence about international travel, like if, needs pre-approval.
Right,
So
by the board,
by the
though,
board,
yeah. So.
Yeah, and so we've upgraded it and made it its own separate little number, so hopefully it's a little bit more. And Elizabeth has been sending out blast emails, like every time we get a request, she's like, did you not see the blast message we sent out? Like, you have to have approval first, don't buy your tickets, don't make plans. And so I think what it's coming down to is we're realizing that people just don't read.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot too. So I think one of the other things that, and I don't know, I haven't seen that language, so I'm not familiar with that. I think prior to coming back and practicing nursing after that exposure, because there is a period of time where there is a break in their monitoring, that we are requesting a clean drug screen that is more than just the last 24-hour assessment, that we're asking for things like and Linda help me here, the hair follicle and some of those other tests that span a longer period of time.
Yeah, and the blood test is 2 to 4 weeks. And if you think about it, they're only going to be gone for 1 to 2 weeks. And we will have already been drug testing them up until they leave otherwise. So a hair test is 3 to 6 months, very expensive. And nail clippings is up to 3 months also. So that's an option. Linda and I met with a lot of people in Vegas at the NOAP conference about doing anywhere, anytime testing instead of them having to go to a lab, trying to figure out ways to get out of that excuse. We get so many, I can't make it, blah, blah, blah. So this way, hey, take your kit with you and you can test whenever, wherever. And I don't know if that would work internationally either. I mean, I don't know why, except for probably the shipping piece would be a problem if it didn't ship back in.
Mhm,
So,
mhm.
but yeah, definitely, yeah, we definitely agree that there needs to be a more stringent test. But I think we also have to look at if they're being tested on a regular basis up until they leave, why do we need to go back 6 months now when they've already been tested up until now?
I think our only concern, my only concern, I'll speak for myself, is when that travel lasts 2 or 3 weeks and then there's a longer gap. And then that 2-week blood test doesn't cover the gap.
Yeah.
And that's where, I think we had a case like that where we were really, and it's not that we need both, you know, I
Mhm.
understand that they're pretty duplicative and we don't need, and I'm talking about things I don't know a lot about, but the nail bed testing versus hair
Mhm.
testing, I think most substances are covered in both, so I don't know that there's a benefit to one or the other if one's less expensive. I think it's specific to that time frame. Occasionally, we see that international travel be more than just 1 or 2 weeks, and so if that's the case, that's
Yeah,
when we
well, if
want
that's the
that
case, yeah, absolutely, but, yeah. I know our most recent one, the sun trip was, I think, a week. She'll be back. When she got back, I think she was gone last week. So, yeah, it's just really interesting. It's just been bombardment of requests. It's like, what is going on? Yeah, they're traveling more than I get to travel, so,
So if we're looking at longer than a certain period of time, then that might need to increase the amount. And this may never, ever, ever happen. But we're sure they're not doing any kind of nursing in their travels.
well, that's, I mean,
Like
that's,
volunteer for this or that, where I'm exposed to.
that is part of the addendum that Rachel, she put that language in that,
Okay.
you know, I promise I will not, I understand I will not do any nursing. You know, again, we don't know what people are doing.
Right, but that's.
Well, and I
has
don't
been
know that-
addressed.
I don't know that we would have jurisdiction. You know, if they're not practicing, if they're practicing under an international license, we may not, you know, I mean, if they're not
Okay.
practicing under their Kansas license at that, so.
Mhm.
I
I
just
don't know.
didn't know if it was looked at at all because
Sorry, Brenda. Linda's pointing at your hand up, so I apologize.
That's okay. I just wanted to be sure that we are in fact allowing for some exceptions for international travel, so that we have a lot of foreign-born nurses in the state that may have a parent who passes or, you know, a child's wedding. I think those are life things and there need to be exceptions, but I do agree that the testing regimen should match the amount of travel time prior to and after, just to make sure we're covering for that.
And Brenda, we do allow for that. In fact, the prior language in our contract stated that international travel was only approved for cases like what you've described, a death, a significant wedding, those kinds of things internationally. And then that's what we're finding is that those have always been approved, but these requests now are for a relative's birthday party or an anniversary celebration, those kinds of things that probably were pre-planned for some time and maybe, you know, it for someone who's involved in KNAP and in a monitoring program, probably should have chose other options. Okay, thank you very much. Anything else, Linda, you want to talk about with that?
I just want to say maybe, I know you and I are going to visit, Stephanie are going to visit this summer about what we learned at NOAA.
Mhm.
Put some things together. I know she's been visiting with some other vendors and things because we've got some specimen collection costs that are just gotten through the roof. So we've got some ideas as far as what you've kind of, and maybe we can come back in September then with a follow-up for all of that, those type things and what we learned from NOAA to kind of really build the program better, more efficient.
Definitely
Maybe my
see
suggestion.
there's room for improvement and growth. And one thing I've been thinking about is implementing an exit survey. As much as I'm sure neither myself or Elizabeth want to hear. But, you know, I think we need to hear what worked and what didn't work and what they liked and what was helpful and what, and there's some things that just we can't change. It's just, I had someone fell off the chair last week because I offered him a 3-year contract and thought that was so excessive. I'm like, oh, well, I just got back from NOAP and there's programs that start at 5 years. We have someone, a vet down in Oklahoma who might be transferring up 10 years. So it's like,
Well, that's what the studies show. I mean, those 1-year programs are really, they're not changing behaviors. So it takes longer periods of time to show success. And, you know, that's not always what people want to hear. So we do, as a board, very much appreciate the relationship that we have with you all, and things are going really well. We're very happy with the communication and with the partnership, and I'm grateful that you're here today. I think it's good for us to put names with faces and connect, and I'm grateful that we're working on a couple amendments to the contract and changing some of that language. I think as we identify opportunities like this in the future, it just makes us stronger.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are, I think from a healthcare profession, we have one of the best assistance programs, and we very much appreciate what you do.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
No, but you said it perfectly.
Brenda, any other questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you. I look forward to seeing the draft amendment to the contract.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, moving on to new business. I think we have a presentation about remedial education by Dr. Caldecott. Am I saying that right?
You are.
Hi, Dr. Caldecott.
Hi, nice to meet you. Please call me Catherine.
Catherine, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I met Linda about not quite a year ago at the CLEAR conference, and we have corresponded ever since, and we did a presentation for the investigators. But then I did another presentation at the recent NCSBN meeting in California where I ran into Linda. And she thought that because this committee is reviewing statutory language about alternative to discipline, especially in situations where the infractions may be relatively minor, that what I had to say at NCSBN might be of use to all of you as you think through these kinds of cases. So the materials that we distributed to you, the PDF of a presentation, are on the NCSBN slide template. You might have noticed that if you looked through them. The presentation that my colleague Casey Cleary and I are going to make today is exactly the same content, but we just put it on the PBI slide template. So with that, I'm going to try to share my slides. I think I do have permission to do that. So let me just go ahead and no, I do need, I need somebody to grant me permission to share. Let me see if that, good, that worked. Thank you. Whoever that was who waved the magic wand, I appreciate it. Okay, so I assume you can all see that. So good. All right. So what we'd like to do is go through some material, and then I'm certain you'll want to ask us some questions. You may have some discussion. If you don't mind, leave your questions until the end, and then we can talk about whatever your interests or concerns are. So, today we're going to go through a variety of things distinguishing remedial educational interventions from other kinds of education. We'll talk to you about why remediation can be useful, which licensees do have remediation potential. We'll talk about the timing of remediation and how it actually even works, and then criteria for choosing a reputable remedial course provider. So just so you know, there are several providers of remedial courses out there, and PBI Education, which is where we are from, we are just one of them. To a fair degree, most of us do things quite similarly. So what we will be telling you today will largely apply to the others. However, when we talk about aspects of PBI's method that are unique to us, we will tell you about that. We'll tell you that it is unique to us. So let me just give you a little bit about background about myself, and then Casey will introduce herself. So my clinical training is in internal medicine. Um, Although I chose to give up clinical care back in 2001, I was in academia at the time, and I decided I wanted to devote myself to ethics education, clinical consultation, and research. And in that capacity, I taught not only medical students and physicians, but also nursing students and practicing nurses, physical therapy students, physical therapists, um, medical imaging technologists, a wide array of clinicians. In the year 2007, I learned about this world of remedial education, and I had no idea what it was. I was recruited to join the faculty of one of the other remedial course providers out there, um, and learned that remedial education is not the kind of thing that you learn in a classroom. It's really something that happens after a licensee, a clinical licensee, has committed some kind of conduct of concern. Um, in that capacity with that organization, I became the program director, so I did that for another 7 years. And then I moved over to PBI in 2017. I am a senior faculty member at PBI. Initially, I had a title of regulatory liaison, but that evolved into my current title, which is medical director. And I have written some publications on remediation, including a publication in the Journal of Nursing Regulation. I think that was about 2019 or around there, maybe 2021, something like that. So anyway, that's just a flavor for my background. Now, Casey, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you all so much for having us. I am PBI's Senior Education Manager as of about a week ago. So I moved into that role just recently, but prior to that, I was PBI's project coordinator and then our project manager. And so I've done all aspects of jobs with PBI, including working directly with participants and reviewing assignments. And now my role, which has been mostly for the past year or so, is our liaison with state medical and nursing boards. So if they need a recommendation on a particular course, or they need some help guiding them on an educational intervention, I will work with them closely and they'll let me know what's going on. And so I also serve as a course proctor for our live remedial courses. So in that case, I sit in on the live courses as our faculty, like Catherine, teach them and ensure that everything is going smoothly and work really closely with the faculty. And we also have preventative education, even though we'll talk to you mostly today about our remedial education. But I work with state boards and large organizations, hospital organizations to implement that preventative education in boundaries.
Great, thanks, Casey. All right, so now let's move into our topic at hand. So, of course, as you know, one primary role of regulators is to make appropriate decisions that adequately address a licensee's conduct of concern. And often regulators determine that remedial interventions are necessary or advisable. Remedial interventions can take many forms, such as educational courses, coaching, peer assessors, and mentorship. Today, we are going to talk with you specifically about intensive educational courses, and we're going to focus on topics such as professional boundaries, ethics and professionalism, civility and communication, record keeping, and then for those Kansas nurses who do have prescriptive authority, proper prescribing. So in other words, we're not going to talk to you today about remediating deficiencies in fund of knowledge or clinical skills. So in our remarks today, we will include the perspectives of referring nursing regulators, nursing licensee course participants, and course faculty. So this is going to be a little bit like a peek inside the classroom, a kind of a who, what, where, when, why, how sort of thing. We're going to start with the what. So what is remediation? Well, the word remediation comes from the verb to remedy, which is really meaning to right a wrong or correct a fault. So what is remedial education? The term I've already used today, intensive educational interventions, suggests something different from the kinds of courses your licensees take for continuous professional development, whether they are required by you as a regulator or simply for their own edification. They differ in several ways. So first, continuous professional development courses are typically brief, say an hour or so, or they may be self-guided study online or even public presentations delivered in a conference setting. By contrast, the kinds of courses that we are talking to you about today are taken for the purpose of remediation of a particular conduct of concern. So remedial courses in the topics I already mentioned to you: boundaries, ethics, professionalism, civility and communication, record keeping and prescribing. They are intense. They're offered in a small group setting, generally limited to about a dozen course participants. They can span days. Most are held virtually now. They are live and synchronous. But there's something else that sets remedial courses apart. Remedial courses are highly personal in that they require truth-telling, the development of insight, and the crafting of a plan of ongoing accountability to prevent recidivism. Another difference is that most remedial course providers generate a written evaluation of how the participant did in the course. And finally, you should know it is also possible to fail a remedial course. Simply attending is not enough. Course participants must do the required work to earn a passing grade. All right, so why would you refer someone to remedial education? I'm going to give you a couple of reasons, and both just happen to involve telehealth. So here's the case of a nurse midwife, Ms. Elderberry. She's mid-career. Her spouse contracted COVID. I should tell you, all the hypothetical cases that I'm presenting, or we will present to you today, are based in truth. We have changed details to preserve people's anonymity or preserve their identities. But these are real cases. So this goes back a few years. Ms. Elderberry's spouse contracted COVID. Her entire family became ill. Her spouse sadly died from COVID. The family had a lot of financial trouble from medical bills and her spouse's loss of income. And Ms. Elderberry took only 2 weeks off of work when her husband died. Some patients complained that she appeared unkempt and seemed even to be wearing a bathrobe during their appointments. Here's another telehealth case of a nurse case manager, Mr. Ivy, who's following an elderly woman with complex care needs. The patient's adult daughter lost her job. Because she is out of work, she's available to assist her mother with the technology and be present for the televisits. Mr. Ivy feels sorry for this family and begins to assist the daughter in finding new job leads. The daughter does get a job through one of Mr. Ivy's contacts. One evening, while drinking, Mr. Ivy texted a sexually explicit photo of himself to the daughter. So why refer for remediation? Every nurse, every single one, has the potential for exercising poor judgment and committing a professional infraction. It doesn't matter how smart or well-trained or accomplished or experienced they are. Sometimes capable nurses exercise poor judgment. They might cut corners or bend the rules or rationalize actions that deep down inside they know might be a little iffy. Left uncorrected, lesser misdeeds have a way of becoming normalized. So for example, Ms. Locust, a nurse who performs laser hair removal and administers Botox injections at a Medi-Spa without appropriate physician, nurse practitioner, or PA supervision. You might refer for remediation if there are departures from the standard of care or violations of the Kansas Nurse Practice Act. Now, I know that state nurse practice acts vary in their terminology and scope, but many include items such as record keeping, billing, unprofessional language, disruptive conduct, informed consent, conflicts of interest, dual relationships, including sexual impropriety. And of course, you may receive a complaint about some kind of conduct of concern that does not rise to the level of requiring formal discipline, but merits some kind of intervention. And this is a great opportunity for remedial education. But another important reason does not necessarily pertain to the exact infraction itself. As I mentioned earlier, left uncorrected, lesser misdeeds can become normalized and lead to worse conduct and greater harms later. So this is an argument for interrupting patterns via an educational intervention. Okay, who has remediation potential? Before I talk to you about remediation potential, let's talk about who has infraction potential. That is everyone. A couple of slides ago, I told you that every nurse has the potential for exercising poor judgment and committing a professional infraction. Why is that? Because we are human beings working with other humans under stressful circumstances, with external life stressors and personal histories and upbringings and cultures that color how we function in the world and respond to situations and people. Now, not all nurses who commit infractions are created equal, and nurses get into trouble in unique ways for their own unique reasons. So here are some examples. Nurse Maple might give medical advice or provide care to a coworker or friend with an acute issue because they want to be helpful and save their friend, who is now their patient, the time and trouble of going elsewhere for care. They feel they are doing a favor. But Nurse Dogwood might provide ongoing care to their spouse or parent or child or other family member because they believe they are the only one who could do a good enough job caring for that family member. Or they believe that if they didn't provide care to the family member would not otherwise get care. In the latter scenario, the underlying issue lies in the interpersonal family dynamics, which are more complicated and fraught than the former scenario where the nurse simply wants to do a one-time favor. Now let's shift back to remediation potential. In general, the vast majority of nurses who have committed some kind of improper act can be remediated. How can you tell who has remediation potential? Well, you can often tell who has remediation potential by whether they take responsibility for their actions, even if, or especially if, their perspective on the issue differs from the perspective of the complainant. Well-trained investigators can uncover important details that can assist you in making those determinations. Sometimes outside assessment services are necessary to determine the nurse's remediation potential and risk of recidivism. But sometimes you aren't sure, but you sent the nurse to a course anyway, even though they have been very, what we call, resistant with you. And I'll get more into resistance on the next slide. But maybe they didn't take responsibility or express remorse, or maybe they failed to appreciate your concerns. But during the course, the safe, constructive, and educational setting can open their minds to other perspectives, such as the complainant's perspective and your perspective. Being in a peer group where they hear other stories helps a lot. They will come to drop their resistance, tell the truth about what they were thinking or feeling, develop insight into why they acted as they did, and assume responsibility for changing their conduct and practicing more safely in the future. And this is where a written evaluation of the nurse's performance in the course can be extremely valuable to you. In other words, the investigator, an assessment service, and course faculty can serve as a safety net. All right, so we've talked about who has remediation potential. Let's talk for a minute about who might not have remediation potential. I just mentioned resistance, so let me explain that a little bit. Resistance comes from defense mechanisms. Now, defense mechanisms are normal responses to anxiety-provoking situations. They aren't necessarily bad or unhealthy, but they can be. For example, when they interfere with a licensee's willingness or ability to appreciate the impact of what they did, or if the resistance prevents a licensee from developing insight into their own personal ingredients that made them vulnerable to committing an infraction. The kinds of defense mechanisms I'm talking about include denial, rationalization, justification, other blaming, intellectualization, or excuses, such as, well, I have had a long, previously unblemished career, or patient care didn't suffer as a result of the infraction. In other situations, you may be dealing with someone who has been permitted to behave badly in the past without having been called on it, or someone who may have a certain personality type or a bona fide personality disorder. There are two main groups of people we have found through our experience who might not have remediation potential. The first is those licensees who have a significant history of trauma. That is an event, a series of events, or set of circumstances that's experienced by them as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects. A full explanation of how trauma plays out in healthcare for both patients and clinicians is well beyond the scope of our presentation to you today, although it is something we know a fair amount about. We could talk about that later if you would like. But I mention it now because it's so common. About 70% of adults in the United States have experienced at least one traumatic event in their lives. Actually, that statistic holds up worldwide. There have been quite a lot of studies on this from folks of folks from a lot of other countries around the world. So 70% seems to be a pretty firm statistic. What was the trauma from? It could have been from childhood abuse, household challenges, or neglect. It could have been from military service, other kinds of abuse, the loss of a loved one, a serious accident, being on the receiving end of racism or other discrimination. I'm certain that you have an interest in taking a trauma-informed approach with patients and complainants. But given those odds, the 70% statistic, chances are very good that most nurses also have a history of trauma. And that includes the subset of nurses who have demonstrated some kind of conduct of concern. In fact, there are some very interesting research reports in medicine about the increased incidence of childhood trauma among physicians and medical students, who then go on to have boundary issues, substance use disorders, and disruptive behavior. I can't imagine why that correlation would be different in other healthcare professions. Now, to be sure, many nurses who have histories of trauma do indeed have remediation potential. But among the nurses who do not have remediation potential, many have a history of very significant trauma, typically several different types of trauma occurring throughout their lives. The other group whose conduct you might consider egregious, but perhaps don't, at least at first glance, meet criteria for license revocation. So those are the folks you read about in the newspaper: predators, serial offenders, those who target particularly vulnerable patients or students or even coworkers. In these cases, you have the same safety net that I mentioned earlier. Investigators, especially if they are trained in trauma-informed investigation techniques, assessment programs that can render opinions about recidivism potential, and remediation course faculty. Just as the faculty can discover who has remediation potential, they may also see or hear things that raise concerns for a high risk of recidivism. The licensee might not meet criteria for passing the course, perhaps because of poor participation, failing to demonstrate an effort to learn and develop insight, or not taking the process seriously. And here is where a written evaluation of the nurse's performance in the course can be extremely valuable to you. All right, when in the regulatory process should referral to a remedial course be made? So we have an expression at PBI: immediacy matters. Taking the remedial course as soon as possible, ideally within a month or so of the settlement agreement or order, is preferable for several reasons that I think will make intuitive sense to you. So first, it accelerates improvements in practice. It also reduces the risk of additional wrongdoing before the remedial education has occurred. It increases the impact of regulatory proceedings because as the length of time between the infraction and the remedial education increases, the connection between what was done and what needs to change becomes attenuated. And it facilitates change. The longer the delay in remediation, the more solidified the licensee's resistance becomes. Participants are more receptive to learning and changing when resistant thinking has not had an opportunity to become entrenched. As an aside, from a faculty perspective, the experience of offering a course virtually is very valuable and in some ways even superior to offering a course in a hotel conference room somewhere. Eye contact is direct and straight on. Participant comments are directed to the entire group. From a course participant perspective, virtual is preferable in almost every case. In our course evaluations, we ask participants specifically about the virtual experience. Their responses consistently reflect appreciation for the time and money saved by taking the course virtually. But perhaps even more important, many express that it was easier for them to talk openly and honestly about their situation from the comfort of familiar surroundings, rather than in a strange place away from their support systems. Now that most remedial course providers offer their courses through virtual platforms such as Zoom, for example, it should not be difficult to find an available course within a short period of time. All right, now I'm going to turn the floor over to Casey.
Thank you, Catherine. So I'm going to talk about how do remedial courses work. I'm sure you're all wondering what actually takes place in these courses that is so effective for change behavior. So the course experience begins with the first contact with a course provider, and this could be via the website. On PBI's website, we are very careful to have our language reflect the constructive, productive, and restorative philosophy that guides all of our courses. Often, however, the first contact is through a phone call. Our whole administrative staff is trained in having conversations with people who are unhappy to have to take a course, they're resistant to accepting responsibility, or they're just generally upset about the personal and professional fallout from their accusation or infraction. And from personal experience, yes, we get quite a few that aren't so happy to be taking the course, but I'll talk a little bit more later about how those walls begin to break down and how we see that change. Each course has pre-course assignments that vary from provider to provider. This is how PBI does it, but most other course providers have something similar. So we start with the pre-course readings. Some of our courses have reading packets that we have developed very specifically to prime course participants for the content and the process of remediation. For other courses, we assign articles from the relevant literature. And there are post-tests for all of these readings to make sure that they're absorbing what they read. I've heard feedback from participants that these readings were so helpful to them. One of the things that faculty typically open with in the course is, what did you get out of the pre-course assignments? And so as course proctor, when I'm sitting in, it's always so great to hear the participants say, I was shocked at how much I learned just from the readings, things that they've never thought about before. We also have developed self-assessment questionnaires that are topic specific. So a questionnaire for the boundaries course may differ from the questionnaire for the communications course, and so on with the other course topics. These questionnaires are helpful in uncovering other aspects of professional conduct, maybe that aren't part of this particular investigation or complaint that they are being required to take the course for, but it might indicate additional issues and uncover things that need to be dealt with other areas of concern. The My Story assignment is where nurses get to provide their perspective on what they did and why. It's really, really instructive for the faculty to see how this assignment is written. Some course participants engage in a lot of rationalization or other blaming. They might downplay the consequences of their actions by stating that the patient care didn't suffer. But other licensees make use of this assignment as an opportunity to reflect on their thoughts and feelings that led up to the infraction, which play a really big part in it. For the most part, they're truthful, they're remorseful, and they show the beginnings of insight, and they commit themselves to learning and avoiding future mistakes. So you can see that the educational process has already begun far before they even start the first day of the course. Once the course begins, here are the expectations that PBI has. Satisfactory completion of the pre-course assignments. If they aren't satisfactory, which we do see from time to time, whether they're incomplete or we can tell they didn't put a lot of thought into it or they aren't reflecting, we will allow them to revise and resubmit. We'll request that from them and let them know exactly what it is that we're looking for. Attentiveness and engagement in discussions. This is really important for the course, that we listen for comments that reflect applying the course concepts to their own particular situations. Many also chime in on how course concepts apply to the situations of other participants in the course. The goals of our course are to articulate what put the nurse at risk for committing a professional infraction and what exactly it was that made them vulnerable to exercising poor judgment. Through the risks and vulnerabilities, we have them identify those. We have them identify the red flags that they missed along the way. Sometimes it's easy to miss them in the moment, but when they're looking back and reflecting, it becomes much more clear. To be able to explain the consequences of their actions on others, looking at it from the bigger picture, what did their actions, what kind of consequences did that have for their patients, for their practice as a whole, their colleagues or students, their families, and the impact as a whole on the reputation and image of the nursing profession itself. To develop a plan of safeguards that will reduce their risk of recidivism. These safeguards will keep nurses on track when their reasoning and judgment is threatened by distractions or the pressures of work, personal life, or just being in the moment. And to recognize how professional lapses can adversely impact clinical judgment. So process orientation is a key distinguishing feature of a good remedial course. The course must provide an environment where the underlying reasons and processes come to light and are discussed so that the participants learn more about themselves and how they veered so far out of their professional roles. Most course participants already know what was wrong about what they did. Many of them can even say why what they did was wrong. But what they don't understand is why that knowledge flew out the window. Say an RN who specializes in the treatment of children with cystic fibrosis engages in a friendship with the parents of one of her young patients. The friendship then continues to develop and develops into a sexual relationship. Or an LPN who does home care returns to the home of a former patient, reportedly for a social visit, only to be found by a family member later to be stealing the patient's opioid medication. Nurses like these know they're supposed to adhere to professional ethical principles, like doing good or avoiding causing harm. Or they're supposed to demonstrate professional virtues such as trustworthiness and honesty. But they don't understand how it was that they were able to act in such a way that they violated those ethical principles and virtues. In short, then, content is necessary and important, but it's not sufficient for them to see how they got to that point. It's the process piece that is critical. Now I'll explain the process orientation so you have a better idea of what that actually means from the perspective of a nurse licensee. First, course participants are required to tell their story to the rest of the class. Then the faculty and their classmates get to ask them clarifying questions or make comments about what happened. Importantly, course participants learn from each other. So, for example, the participants whose resistance has already been broken down or who have developed insight and are taking full responsibility for their actions and are committed to holding themselves accountable going forward, they serve as great role models for their classmates who still may be resistant. A lot of times we'll see different statuses along the way of maybe one licensee is really far along in the process and has been going through it for years, and another, maybe a complaint was just filed. So seeing the perspective of someone who's been going through it quite a longer time can be a great role model for those. They also learn from each other's mistakes. It's not at all unusual for a course participant who is attending a course for one reason to learn that one of their classmates has gotten into trouble for something that they too are doing, but they just haven't gotten in trouble for it. So participants address not only the reason why they're taking the course, but also other things they may be doing that are also problematic that perhaps they didn't realize. At the very beginning, we mentioned other remedial interventions that a regulator might mandate, such as coaching or mentoring. Both of those interventions have great value, particularly as an alternative to discipline. But what participants get out of the small group educational interaction with their peers who are in similar situations can't be accomplished the same way in a one-on-one coaching or mentoring. So we collect course evaluations. I know Catherine mentioned that towards the beginning, from every participant at the end of the course in order for them to receive their certificate of completion. And I will say that's one thing that in this role I get really excited for. It's one of my favorite parts of the job. As we mentioned before, a lot of the course participants, they come into the course a bit upset, or they're rationalizing, or they're saying, this is just a formality, I don't need this. I've spoken to so many participants on the phone that I hear that. I've met with them on Zoom when we do our technology checks, may have talked to them through email, or even reviewed their pre-course assignments. And it's truly incredible to see the transformation from when they first start the course process, even just calling to ask about registration, until the end of the course when they finish. So we wanted to share some reflections on the remediation process from actual course participants who have given us permission to use these. So the first one here is, I am now constantly thinking about how to improve, how to avoid mistakes and slips, and how to pass this information along. I loved the virtual aspect of it, which made me pay attention 100% throughout the course by seeing all the participants and the instructor right in front of my eyes at all times. The outcome was transformation of mindset over a span of 3 days, a feat that in itself is staggering in terms of achieving measurable results. Educational as well as therapeutic, and gave me the opportunity to learn from others. I will be continually modifying and making changes to how I practice. So the regulator's perspective. I've already told you that course participants get to tell their side of the story, but as a regulator, you get to tell your side of the story too. Most providers require that the participant upload referral documentation from you. That way we learn about the results of any investigation that are documented, or the expert consultant's report, or your particular concerns, especially any violations of the Nurse Practice Act. So seeing both of these, the participant story and then the actual referral documentation from the regulator, is really, really important to bridge any gaps that may be missing between the stories and how the licensee themselves, what they might not be seeing. After your licensee has completed a remedial course, you'll want to know what to expect. Did the nurse address the conduct of concern? What safeguards have they put into place so they can be trusted again with the safety of the public? Does the course faculty have any additional recommendations for interventions or ways to make the remediation more successful? Most course providers have some official way of communicating that information to you. At PBI, we call it an AIR letter. And AIR is an acronym for accomplishments, impressions, and recommendations. Other course providers have their own unique name for a post-course report. If you send your licensee to us for a remedial course and you do want an AIR letter, you can specify that right in the referral letter in the agreed order or settlement agreement, or you can email us and let us know as well. If you recommend or mandate participation in a remedial course, you probably specify that the nurse should complete the course successfully. But successful completion of a course is not the same as successful completion of remediation, because remediation is a process that involves a lifelong commitment to safe practice. What you are after is a change in thinking and behaving that will last. Remediation can be thought of like the lifelong learning that nursing professionals commit themselves to. The nurse may have normalized bending the rules or cutting corners, which may be the reason you have received complaints about them. Now it's the process of remediation that becomes normalized, something that keeps the nurses practicing safely over the span of their careers. You might be wondering why passing a course, let's say a university course or a self-study or an online course, isn't good enough to get someone back on track. It might be, but it might not be enough to get them to stay on track. Standards of care change over time. Societal expectations can change over time. People change over time. Life circumstances change over time. All those changes can render a nurse vulnerable to committing an infraction, despite their very best intentions. This is why remediation is a process that is akin to the lifelong learning we expect of all nurses. One way of reinforcing the impact of remediation is to require participation in a longitudinal follow-up to the remedial course. PBI offers a weekly faculty-facilitated small group teleconference for graduates of our intensive remedial courses. It's called Maintaining Accountability with Support, which we abbreviate to MAS. Other course providers have something similar, although I don't know of any that have it in a group process format. The facilitators of MAS are course faculty that have taught the live remedial courses, and participants sign up for a designated cohort, so there's coherence to the group each week. If someone is on call or on vacation, or maybe they get sick, they can miss a session or two here and there, and those simply just get tacked on to the end. Participation and attendance are required for a course certificate and continuing education credits to be awarded. So the benefits of a longitudinal follow-up course include continued engagement with the material. It keeps it fresh in their minds week to week. It monitors compliance with their plan. And also, very importantly, we hear this a lot with course participants, is that it decreases their professional isolation. We hear this all the time. Many of them maybe have never really even spoken about what they've gotten in trouble with their board before because they're embarrassed or ashamed. So they're in a community where they feel safe talking about it and they don't feel quite so isolated. And then they continue learning from others' mistakes. Many participants choose to continue in MAS even after the mandated period, some for years. We have quite a few MAS participants who were required to take one cycle of it as part of an extended course. And they have continued to sign up for years and years because they find it so supportive and beneficial to their career going forward. It's a great way of avoiding recidivism, or for those who have not needed formal discipline, a way of avoiding that discipline in the future. So now I'll pass it back to Catherine to talk about recidivism.
Great. Thank you, Casey. Excuse me. And just while we're talking about MAS, the Maintaining Accountability with Support, I happen to lead one of the cohorts. I'm the Thursday person. I have someone in my cohort who has chosen to continue in MAS, I think for the last 15 years. I think he's the record holder. Somebody else for about 10 years, someone else for 5 years, someone else for 3 years, 4 years. These are folks who really, I think they're really afraid of messing up again, and it keeps them accountable. They learn from each other, um, and that point about professional isolation is a really powerful one. Those of us who have studied the kinds of factors that cause people, licensed healthcare professionals, to get into trouble, professional isolation, especially things like solo practice or practicing in a rural community where you may be the only healthcare professional for in a large geographic area. Those are very potent risk factors for just failing to keep up with standards and guidelines and bending the rules and things like that. So, okay, so talking about recidivism, and you heard Casey tell you about interventions that help licensees and help nurses stay on track. So you are likely concerned about recidivism. It's a question I get often. It might surprise you to know that recidivism is really hard to study, especially it's hard to study well. I even wrote a paper about that too. But there are so many variables and obstacles to following licensees over time. You don't always know if they have gotten into trouble again, if their employer has simply instituted a performance improvement plan. That's one example, and I've listed other examples here on this slide. And I was even thinking about that during your earlier discussion this morning about folks who are in KNAP who wish to travel overseas. And if it's for a week, well, that's not such a big deal. What if it's for 3 weeks? How do you handle that? Anyway, so one point on this slide, though, I want to highlight is what I'm calling secondary recidivism. So that is when a licensee commits a new infraction of a type that differs from the original infraction. So let's say a HIPAA violation followed by an impairment issue. So you would have to decide whether those things count as recidivism. So those are examples why recidivism is kind of hard to pin down in terms of statistics. Having said all that, at PBI, we did look at clinicians who had taken one of our remedial courses, and we looked at the clinicians or had taken any one of our remedial courses. We looked at clinicians only from a single state. We chose a state because it had very good publicly accessible accusations as well as disciplinary documents, and they were uploaded in a timely manner. The participants took our course during the 5-year period between 2010 and 2014. And here's the important thing. We followed these people for anywhere from 6 to 11 years. So we followed them through the end of 2020. So you'll see our sample size is small. So I don't know that we can completely generalize from these findings, but at least it gives you a snapshot of a subset of our course participants. So again, primary recidivism is recommitting the same sort of infraction. Secondary recidivism is committing a different sort of professional infraction. So out of the 210 folks who met inclusion criteria, less than 3% of them had primary recidivism over a period of between 6 and 11 years. And then less than 7% had secondary recidivism, again, over a period of 6 to 11 years. In that other category, that other column, just so you know, those were voluntary surrenders of their license, non-renewal of the license, the death of the registrant or the licensee, the failure in clinical competence assessment causing a revocation. So things like that. So you see the numbers are pretty good, despite the fact that it is a small sample size. All right, so you had the regulator's perspective, the course participants' perspective. I'm now going to give you the faculty perspective. This, I don't know how well you can see the faces on this slide, but this is usually what I see at the beginning of a course. People are hidden in shadows. They're far from their webcams. We do ask them to increase the lighting on their faces and move closer to their cameras. Then you can really see in their eyes that they may be doubtful or suspicious. They may be on their guard, anticipating that they will be yelled at or told that they are bad nurses or bad people. They may be wondering what sort of cretins will be taking the class with them. So my job is to help them see that I am not going to yell at them. That doesn't mean I am going to be soft on them, but no one ever learned anything when they felt defensive or suspicious or were on guard. I have to get them in a frame of mind to learn and to understand why they are being held to account. I have to honor their perspective and their personal stories, and to help them see that the reasons why they committed some kind of professional wrongdoing are complex and may even be rooted in the past, possibly even in their childhood, and that there are other perspectives that they should have taken into account before they did or said whatever it was that they did or said. So this stance of giving them the respect to tell their story in a safe, supportive, and highly confidential environment can transform these kinds of faces into these kinds of faces. Yes, I realize this is a different group of people, but I think you get the idea. And by the way, there is a woman in the second row who is far from her camera, so if I were her faculty member, I would ask her to move closer. My point is, there really is a tremendous transformation in how people appear and engage at the very beginning of a course, through the rest of the course. And sometimes that change, those defenses just melt very quickly. The change might even be noticeable within the first hour or two. As faculty, we hear and handle a lot of serious business. Guilt, shame, remorse, fear of losing their livelihoods, their careers, their reputations, everything they have worked so hard for. It might surprise you to see suicide on this list, but it is a very real concern for some course participants. For some, it's the actual infraction and the harms they caused that might make them have suicidal thoughts. For others, it could be the potential loss of livelihood, ability to care for their loved ones, or reputation that may cause suicidal thoughts. And the final bullet, transformation, is the one positive item in the list. And what I mean by transformation is an opening of eyes and minds to the reality of how they were thinking and practicing, developing an ability to take another's perspective, whether that is the perspective of the person on the receiving end of whatever it was they did, or your perspective as a protector of the public. And then a commitment to practicing safely, fully realizing that licensure is a privilege. So if you would like to send a licensee to a remedial course, how do you choose a reputable course provider? You need to know where to look, and here are some suggestions. Now, this first bullet comes from the Federation of State Medical Boards. It doesn't mean that all of the listings on this I forget the directory, that all the listings on the directory are exclusively for physicians. That is not true at all. It's a great resource. It's, I think like 30 some odd pages long. So if the website doesn't work in your, if in the PDF that you were given, all you need to do really is just go to fsmb.org and in the search bar, put remedial programs, and you will get the directory. And they update the directory at least twice a year. So it's a great resource. You could also ask your peers in other states and ask your colleagues in the state professional health programs. I heard you talk about the NOAP meeting, and that would be a great place to ask folks. There are important things you should expect in any reputable course provider, and I will explain to you what we do in these areas. Excuse me. So first, most course participants who reach out for information or to register feel disgruntled, as you heard Casey talk about, or they feel embarrassed. Our staff is trained in communication techniques both over the phone and in email. They have also received training about implicit bias. Similarly, our faculty are trained in communication techniques, including DEIB and trauma-aware communication and sensitivity to implicit bias. Our faculty are also trained to deal with certain specific situations, such as the resistance I mentioned earlier. So here's an example of how that works. With resistance, you chip away at it. You might not agree with the nurse's perspective and certainly do not condone their behavior, but you have to start from a place of acknowledging that they have a legitimate perspective, but then gradually over the days of the course, help them to see that there are other perspectives that are legitimate and frankly, more important. We work to get the nurse to put themselves in the place of the other person involved in their situation, whether it was a patient or a family member or a trainee or a coworker or whomever, and to think carefully about protection of the public. Now, reticence. This is where the timing of having them tell their story is critical. The faculty let others go first, so they have some role modeling in sharing sensitive information. And they will see that the atmosphere is non-judgmental and supportive. And also, some cultures cause participants to refrain from asking questions because they believe it is a sign of disrespect. Other participants may be enculturated to not expect assistance or support in their learning. So faculty need to have their eyes and ears open for that and specifically encourage their engagement. Any course provider you look at or would like to use should be able to share their course agendas with you, including learning objectives and topics covered. And here are other things you should expect. Look for an approach of restorative, even transformative justice through a respectful learning climate. I've already mentioned to you the small class size. Typically about a dozen. We don't let our classes get any larger than 15. You should expect designated faculty who can observe participants' growth and development over the entirety of the course, rather than different faculty teaching different modules in the course curriculum. You should also expect a strict confidentiality policy. We require all participants to sign our confidentiality policy in order to enroll in a course, and then we explicitly review it in the actual course. The course provider should be able to share with you their criteria for passing and failing. And the course proctor. Now, things may have changed over the years, but to my knowledge, I think the course proctor is unique to how we do it at PBI. Now, there may be other course providers who use a proctor as well, but you heard Casey mention a little bit about this earlier. She has served as a course proctor, and this is a resource to handle any technological or connectivity problems so that the faculty don't have to take time away from the process of the course to deal with those things. They also, and this is even more important, they provide a second set of eyes and ears, especially to ensure participants aren't appearing distracted or multitasking and that they are attending from a private location. They provide an additional accountability safety net regarding attendance, participation, and engagement. And I can say as a faculty member that I really do feel like the proctor is my partner in this. Sometimes I'll have a question about a participant and I'll ask the proctor, did you notice that somebody said something or other, or somebody looked a certain way, or what is your sense about what's going on with this person? Do you think they really are focused, or what did you think of the comment that they made to the other participant? You think I should have a private conversation with them about that? And we can do this. I mean, if somebody says something that we think is maybe inappropriate or insensitive, we will message them and ask them for a private phone call during one of the breaks or during lunchtime and talk to them about it over the phone. Sometimes it's very easy to solve those things over the phone. If it's a matter of saying something insensitive to another course participant that maybe the other course participants might have noticed and been bothered by, then we can address that in front of the group after we have spoken with the person who said whatever the thing is. So those are some examples of how the proctor and the faculty member really work as a team, and how we can deal with issues even in terms of group process that occur in addition to the curriculum that we're covering. Other things to look for in a reputable course provider would be requiring that the participants tell their story. Here is where they face up to the harms they have caused. It's important for them to say those things out loud in their own words. The course process should be interactive and synchronous. Webinars don't count as remedial education. And then an action plan, and this should demonstrate how each participant applies what they have learned in the course to avoid recidivism and ensure that they practice safely going forward. This kind of plan is not always a feature of every remedial course, so you will want to look for it. Other course providers may do it differently, but at PBI, we have participants create a plan in 3 categories. First, for things they will address or change regarding their workplace on an organizational level. Next, for things they will address or change to demonstrate that they are staying in their professional role and demonstrating professional boundaries and policies. And third are things they will address or change in their personal lives to ensure their physical, mental, and relationship health is attended to. And then finally, will the course provider provide you with a written report on how your licensee did in the course? And if so, does it need to be requested or is it done for all course participants? Sometimes licensees don't realize that they are sliding down that slippery slope until it's too late. The course curriculum should include specific class exercises and examples that address these things. Things like triggers and red flags, appreciating others' perspectives, paying attention and reflecting, the risk factors that are inherent in the work of being a nurse, their personal vulnerabilities, burnout, trauma, isolation, and the development of accountability. And these things help participants recognize what skews their priorities. I want to ask Casey to jump back in here for a minute because I think she can add some perspective to this.
Sure. So, how to actually make a referral? What is the action item? What steps do you take? So, first, you can call the course provider or check their website. We have a referrals tab right on our homepage that details out the course topics and what actions fall under the topic of each course. Other course providers, I'm sure, likely do too. And then this is why I wanted to talk about this with the group, because this is a very large part of my role, is that I am happy to discuss particular cases with you. And of course, they can be anonymized and just guide you along and help advise you about what topic area is best. It's not always black and white when you have a complaint that might involve ethics, which overlaps a bit with boundaries, but boundaries is more relationship based and they might be overlapping, or we get a nurse who may have prescribed to friends and family, which is a prescribing issue and a boundary issue. So feel free to call anytime and just talk through the situation, because the more background that we have, the best recommendation we can make. Because a lot of times they're not always cut and dry and super clear. So having the right course for them will maximize their remediation potential. And then referral document, I know we've talked about this a bit already, but a letter, an email is fine with the letter attached, an agreed order, a settlement agreement, or a letter of concern. And it should also spell out your concerns, results of any investigation, and any previous history with this licensee.
So don't forget about the post-course evaluation letter and whether or not you want your licensee to enroll in any kind of post-course follow-up education. Some regulators use a method that we call the approved list method. So what this means is that the regulator compiles a list of courses or course providers they approve of. This would be in contrast to having the licensee identify a course and submit it to you for case-by-case approval. And you can see that directing your licensees to a list of approved courses or course providers streamlines administrative processes and hastens licensee compliance. Immediacy matters. What a number of regulators do is to create the list of approved remedial courses or course providers and post it on their websites for their licensees to refer to. I know that many regulators post on their websites approved continuing education courses that satisfy licensure requirements. And it is true that most remedial courses offer continuing education credits, but as we told you at the very beginning of this talk, that's where the similarity between remedial courses and ordinary continuing education ends. So therefore, it's helpful to list these two different types of courses separately. Okay, so in summary, we've covered a lot of ground today. The difference between ordinary continuing education and assessment and remedial education interventions. We talked about why you might refer and interrupting patterns, who has remediation potential and how to tell, when to make referrals, remember immediacy matters, and how remedial education works. So with that, I'm going to say a hearty thank you to all of you for giving us so much time on your agenda today. Here is our personal contact information. If you have the PDF of these slides and you have that already, but maybe what I should do at this point is take down the slides and then we can have questions and conversation.
That sounds great, Catherine. Thank you very much. Casey, great job. We appreciate the presentation. So last quarter, we heard from an attorney here in the state of Kansas asking us to consider some remedial education opportunities as opposed to discipline. Alternatives to discipline was another word used. So I appreciate the presentation. Linda made this connection over the past quarter and thought it would be great to include you all in our agenda this time and hear about what some of these alternatives to discipline might look like. So we appreciate what you're bringing. I guess, and I think you've addressed a lot of the questions that I have. I don't know that I have 100% clear answer. I have to admit I was surprised that diversion and some of those types of things might be considered for alternatives to discipline. You know, I typically would have thought it might have been unlicensed practice or, you know, and I'm not even really pulling a lot of specific details, but, you know, things that may come up that maybe are more directed at patient care, but just behaviors related to stress in the environment. So I appreciate what you shared. You did challenge my thinking a lot.
Okay.
Adri, Brenda, questions?
Just cost.
Bottom line.
Yes.
Cost was also my question.
Yes.
And how it compares to CE.
Casey, do you want to address that or you want me to?
Sure. So the cost depends on the length of the course and the topic. So the 1-day courses, we have a risk management and ethics course 1 day that for nurses, I believe, is somewhere in the $600 range, and then goes all the way up to our boundaries and communication courses, which are 3-day courses and range from about $2,000 to $3,000. So there's a wide range of costs depending on which particular course it is that they're required to take.
We do have tiered pricing, however, and so nurses qualify for the lower tier, the lower cost. So certainly it is certainly a lot more expensive than ordinary continuing education. That is true, but they are different animals. And we are priced competitively with all the other remedial course providers out there.
Well, and I appreciate that because I think to get the validity, there has to be some buy-in, you know, and I think if the course were free, we would all take it, you know. So I think that shows commitment by an individual who's willing to open themselves up to that expense. So,
And for an alternative to discipline, it's a good investment for those that are just.
it's much cheaper than some of the disciplinary actions. But yeah.
So.
We also, you know, of course, we understand it's a higher cost, but so we also offer payment plans. So if there's ever a licensee who is really stressed about the cost, we do offer payment plan option.
Is that based on credit rating?
It's through PayPal Credit, which is through, they would have to sign up for PayPal Credit separately. So yes, I do believe it is.
Just wondering because, you know, for some, the credit scores can make it challenging.
Well, I really appreciate the presentation. I don't know that I have any additional questions right now. I think that I'd like to think about some of these things you've presented today. I know later in the agenda, we're going to be reviewing our disciplinary statutes a little bit. And I think then that's my question, you know, Adri, Brenda, and I might address is how do our statutes change to potentially include this option? And, you know, you think about post 9/11, post COVID, post some of these traumatic events that our world has gone through, and there's many others I'm failing to connect with right now. I think you had some really good slides in the beginning. Mental health is something that every one of us faces, and the acceptance of seeking help is not where it needs to be. And I think the more open that we as a board can become to alternatives and recognizing that not a one of us is perfect and that we all have opportunities, really recognizes the fact that we're all human. And
That's right. That's right.
and as a board, I don't think we ever expect perfection from any licensee, but the humanization of nursing is what makes us compassionate as well. So
That's right. Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Sometimes some nurses go too far in that. They don't understand that they are allowed to also take care of themselves or allowed to say no or hand a situation over to someone else. They feel like, well, I'm supposed to be compassionate. That means I have to deny everything else about my own existence and be compassionate 24/7 to everybody else. Well, that's a recipe for burnout. That's a recipe for worsening mental health issues. And so sometimes we have folks look at us and say, well, but I was taught to be caring and compassionate and helpful. So you're telling me I'm not supposed to, and that's not what we're telling them at all. It's we're telling them you have to understand where appropriate boundaries are in terms of what you can do for another person, where you have to start taking care of yourself so that you can continue to take care of other people. And you're not abandoning the patient or the person who's coming to you for whatever it is. You're handing that situation off to someone else who can take it on so that you can then take care of yourself. So um, it is interesting when people say, I was taught to be this way and now you're telling me it's wrong. And that's not the message at all. It's just we're telling them there are appropriate times and appropriate places and appropriate people to deal with everything. You don't have to be, there's an expression, and I'm sorry, I never remember I'm quoting here and I never remember the name of the person who quoted it, but you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep somebody else warm. And that's what we see a lot of is well-meaning clinicians who are setting themselves on fire because they are good-heartedly trying to keep other people warm. And that's going too far. So we have to teach them how they can still keep other people warm, but not destroy themselves in the process.
I appreciate that. That's a great quote.
Yeah, isn't it? I know. I really have got to write down the name of the person who said it because I need to give her due because they're not my words, they are hers. But in any case, it's just a very powerful image, and it's something that so many of our course participants can relate to.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your presentation. Certainly has given us a lot to think about. So.
You're welcome. Thank you again, and thank you for all this time. It was really a luxury of time. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And if any questions come up or you want to talk more about anything specific, we're happy to talk anytime. So just give us a call or send us an email. We're glad to talk through it with you some more.
Thank you very much. We will keep this information in the back of our mind, particularly as we continue to move through the agenda. And I do think we'll talk more about it as we get down under our statutes and how do we consider maybe changing our statutes to include some other options. So thank you.
Great. All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great
Bye.
day.
Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so we will move on to our KNAPP statistical summary. This is on page 63 of the agenda, and these are the numbers that we're used to looking at. Stephanie, I know you have a presentation. I don't know if you want to say anything about the statistical summary. We see this regularly.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to
Yeah, I don't know.
add anything to it. So
No, probably not right now. Numbers are getting higher though. Thank you for all the referrals. So it's been great.
Brenda, Audrey, any questions? That's just informational for us.
Nope,
So
I'm
then-
good. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephanie, I think you have the presentation then that you have loaded in our agenda.
Yeah.
Okay. Go through that. I don't know. Colton, Adrian, do you want to project those slides?
Yeah. And then can I just say next when I'm ready for next?
Sorry, there we go. I wasn't given any slides, unless I missed that.
They're in the packet.
It's possible.
It's on page
Oh, it's in
64.
the packet. Okay. Could somebody just email it to me?
I will do that. It's coming now.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
Once I get stuck in streaming mode, my options get limited.
There's a PDF.
I'm able to follow along in my own packet if that's helpful, or does everybody need to see it?
So you can look at yours. I just worry that
I know.
You want to see that? Stand in line, or what do you want to do?
Here we go.
If it's
Colton's
faster.
got it.
I think Colton may have it.
Give me just a second to get it up on the screen.
I apologize, Colton. I should have thought about that before.
Oh, you're okay. I'm still kind of getting back in the swing of it.
Well,
Okay. Will this do what I want it to do?
And I apologize, I don't have the agenda in front of me, so I don't know where I'm at.
don't you love electronics and media? It keeps life interesting.
One second. Trying to get it to go full screen. There it goes. And then I need to get it so you guys on Zoom can see it. Sorry, I haven't actually done this before, so I'm not sure exactly how it's going to work. Okay, I think I need to share first.
There you go.
That's it. Perfect.
Okay, one second. Get it so it's actually on screen on YouTube. Okay. You should be good to go. If you want to go to the next page, I guess you'll have to say something.
Yeah, I'll just say next when I'm ready for you to go to the next page. So, and I think, so again, everyone, I'm Stephanie Decraft. I think I've met everyone here by now, but, and most of you probably know KNAP. Sarah, this is going to be the most relevant for you because this is so brand new. So yeah, you can go to the next. It's just a quick presentation of KNAP. So we were originally established in 1988 along with Strategic Professional Solutions, which was formerly called Heart of America Professional Network, who serves the allied healthcare professionals. Both are designed to aid nurses and healthcare providers, respectively, in the state of Kansas who may have a problem or illness that has or could impair their ability to practice safely. Next. So these programs are considered to be an alternative to discipline, an approach in aiding healthcare providers. So prior to 1988, if a person had a substance use disorder or mental health disorder, age-related impairment, et cetera, and came to their licensing board's attention, their license was often automatically suspended or revoked. There was no recourse or support in providing to aid the healthcare provider to obtain an evaluation or treatment. So basically, it's basically too bad, you're suspended. Go get an attorney, we'll fight, let your attorney fight for you and this and that. So this gave the licensee an option, an alternative option, an alternative discipline to that. Next. Okay, so what is KNAP, Kansas Nurse Assistance Program? We are a nonprofit program. We are overseen by a voluntary board of directors selected from various nursing backgrounds. I think right now we have about 7 or 8. We just added 2 more people, so 7 or 8 on our board. We're partially funded through a contract with the KSBN, and then our additional funding comes from monthly participant fees. Next. So what is impairment? It's basically the inability to practice with reasonable skill and safety due to physical or mental disabilities, including deterioration through the aging process, loss of motor skills, or abuse of drugs or alcohol. We just got a referral from an employer of a APRN with MS, and they're very aware of her physical disability, or not disability, but her physical limitations, but they're starting to notice other limitations. So they're like, what do we do? And so we are in the process of finding a good place for cognitive psychological evaluation and this and that. Talk about cost, very expensive. So the most common mental health disorders include substance use disorder, depression, generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder. There's a lot out there, and I think a lot of us could probably identify with at least one of those in that list, if not more. So it affects so many people. All right, next. The most common causes of impairment include alcohol, substance use, including opioids, fentanyl, amphetamine, Adderall, cocaine, crack, cannabis, marijuana. So in the United States, disability and illness have increased by more than 50% since COVID, with an estimation that 22% of that increase is due to increasing prevalence of drug use disorders, particularly opioid dependence. And I'm going to put my little side in here. I know opioid dependence is an issue. It's horrible. It's everyday, but alcoholism is killing people just as fast, and it's more slow, and it could be a slower progression, but it does not get the attention that the opioid. I actually did an interview last week with the Kansas Health Association or Hospital Association, and I made sure I brought that up because I'm like, yeah, we need to be aware of the fentanyl and the opioid problem, but let's look at this alcohol problem that is so prevalent and available every corner. And I've been in this field for 20 plus years, and nothing is more frustrating than meeting with someone in medical detox at a hospital and say, oh, yes, you need help, but it's going to be 6 to 8 weeks before a bed will be open. Like, that's disheartening. So anyways, other addictive disorders include process addictions, gambling, video gaming, food, sex, exercise, shopping, spending, pornography, work, and self-injury. Focusing on that gambling, that sports betting is huge. It's getting out of control. And so there's just so many things. And some people are like, well, what? Shopping, spending? But as we know, when our personal life is out of control through one of these things, and also, relationship issues, it affects our ability to stay focused at work and to bring our best self every day to work. So it is a never-ending cycle. Okay, so referrals to camp, and I think I'm going through this pretty quickly, but self-referrals to the program are encouraged. We get those several times a month, 2, 3, 4 times a month we get self-referrals. But they also may be made by the KSBN. That's our main refer is KSBN. Family members, employers, a friend, supervisor, anyone that has a concern about a healthcare provider can make a referral. we will not take anonymous referrals. Like, you have to give us your name. That doesn't mean that we're gonna then call the referent and be like, your coworker, Stephanie, called and told us about this. But we have to know who's making the referral. However, this is one thing we're really working on. I'm really stressing is that we want people, we want licensees, we want anyone to feel comfortable calling us, even if it's just to ask questions. The substance use and mental health facilities and processes in the state of Kansas is very hard to decipher sometimes. And I think it's great that KNAP is hiring social workers and addiction counselors and mental health professionals that are working in that to help navigate. Because even if it's just a question like, I don't know what to do, is this a problem? Should I really, you don't have to, just because you're calling doesn't mean that you have to be in KNAP. Maybe you're just starting to question and explore, or asking about a coworker or friend, or even a family member. Okay, so participants in KNAP, substance use disorder, alcohol and other drugs is the primary cause. Can you go back? It keeps going on its own. I hate that. I don't know how to stop that. Okay, thank you. It's the primary cause for referral to KNAP. Alcohol is probably our biggest substance that is used. 70% are referred from the KSBN and 30% from self-referrals, employers, colleagues, or family. Next. All right, so once a referral is made, notification is sent to the individual. Usually I call that person and talk to them about the situation, kind of get an idea of where we're at, what they're doing. Some of them have already started a treatment program, have already worked on a recovery program. Great. So let's figure out what we need to do. I'll talk about their releases of information that we're going to have them sign, what we need to do next regarding an evaluation. Again, though, if they're already in services somewhere or just had an evaluation within the last 6 months, we're not going to make you go do another one, as long as that evaluator treatment provider is willing to document safety to practice. And so I talked to them just about the whole situation and what to expect, and then send them an email with all the paperwork for them to sign and return back. And we preface, public safety is so important, but ultimately you as a human being and your happiness in your life is super important as well. That we've got to look at this as bigger than just, I got referred, but how can your life be better? Let's see. So I think I just talked about this. We have them go do an evaluation. We have a handful of evaluators that we trust. And then once we receive the evaluation, Elizabeth and I staff it to determine if monitoring is appropriate. And if so, which level of monitoring. Next. So we have two tiers right now, and the first one is the 1-year extended evaluation. I really look at this, and I know, and I didn't catch your name. I'm sorry.
I'm Juliana.
Juliana. 1 year isn't always great, and it's not. But for those that have done their evaluation and they're given a mild use disorder, which is very easy to get, or they've been in sustained remission or early remission, like they've been doing what they're supposed to be doing already. And we look at also, so we look at the diagnosis and we look at the reason of referral, what happened to cause them to come into the program. We look at all of that to determine what level, which type of monitoring they need to do. But if they come in, with this mild use disorder or they're already in recovery program, I kind of like to, and this might sound really bad, but give them the chance to hang themselves. If they truly are this mild use disorder, they are going to walk and they're going to be able to get everything done. They're going to do everything great. If it's more than a mild use disorder and they happen to have lied, I know that's shocking. I know that they lied to anybody during this whole process, it's going to come out so quickly through a positive drug screen, or no-show excuses, all this stuff. And then that will easily let us be able to bump them up to a higher level. So we kind of look at all of that too. I don't know what I say about that 1 year. I think I like to give them a chance to hang themselves because there are people that truly did just make a mistake and they, are like, this is a problem, or I know this is bad. I'm already going to 12 meetings a month and I'm so far into recovery and it's great. Like, why do we want to really punish them? But again,
Or they're so far into denial.
or they're so far into denial.
Their, their first opt is to tell the story about how
I
bad
mean,
it
an
is.
addict would lie to Jesus if they could,
Yeah.
so it's, but there are, and each program, the 1 year or the 3 year have the same requirements. So you can go to the next one because I'll review those. So the 3 year are those automatics, that have a moderate to severe substance use disorder. I can't think of my word. I hate this. I hate not being able to think of my word, but the reason for referral, was it patient involved? Was that involved versus I was 21 and I went to a bar and I had too much to drink and me and my bestie got into a fight. We're looking at all that. And so that helps us determine which type of monitoring to recommend. And then in both the 1 and the 3 year, they have the same requirements. We do the random drug screens, a minimum of 12 to 15 a year. So at least once a month, and they're usually surprised with 2 a month, at least once or twice a year. So it kind of keeps them on their toes. As we talked about earlier, we're looking at ways to make this easier. Some people, they have to drive an hour to the nearest collection site. That's just ridiculous. And the cost of the drug test is expensive. And then they go to the collection site and it could be anywhere from $25 to $75 additional, depending on the collection site. It's a lot of money. And so the actual drug test starts at $51. And then if you add on driving, taking away from work, last Tuesday, the inclement weather we had, I had 2 calls of, I'm in a flood zone. Like, the roads are flooded and it's an hour to the nearest site. She's like, can I be excused? And I'm like, well, I'm not going to say no, because I'm not going to make you go kill yourself, but you'll probably, you will be set for another test at some point. But, so just having these opportunities to be able to do it from home or do it on your lunch break at work will take away so much of that excuse. And so I'm very excited. And some of them are a little bit more, it can be more expensive, but at the same time, if you're factoring in everything, it could be good. Can you go back? Sorry. So employer reports everybody who is working under their license, and Elizabeth and I just added this because we have people that aren't licensed but are still working as a MA, a medical assistant, is that right? Or CNA, they're still in the field. They just aren't working as their RN or LPN. We changed our wording to include or working with patients. That your employer will be expected to give us quarterly reports. So attending weekly, and we changed it per month. They have to do a minimum of 8 meetings. It could be AA, it could be NA, it could be Celebrate Recovery, it could be Smart Recovery, it could be Dharma Recovery, it could be Grief Recovery, it could be whatever it is that led them to how they are struggling with what they're struggling with, being engaged in some type of support meeting. However, not everybody is also required to do support meetings. It's not applicable to every single person. Everyone is required to attend 1 monthly monitoring meeting with the KNAP staff. Those are done via Zoom. And this is where we can say COVID for the win, is that it forced these things to go online, 12-step meetings to go online, treatment to go online. Not that it's ideal, but again, you're looking at your Western campus folk where it's an hour to 2 hours to the nearest AA meeting, and they have 4 DUI convictions. How do you expect them to get there? So COVID for the win. Now people can go to meetings 24 hours a day, and I think it's great. So our monthly monitoring meeting is also done via Zoom. They're also required to provide prescriptions for all mood altering medications, mental health medications, narcotics, all of that. And then whatever else the evaluation, recommended treatment, mental health, batterers intervention, whatever it is that the evaluation recommended would also be required. Next. Okay. So what is reported to the KSBN, and we kind of look at this as whether they were, if they're a self-referral, it's a little bit different. If it's self-referral, they are only reported to the KSBN by their KNAP number until there's a non-compliance. Once there is a non-compliance and they know this up front, then they will be being made known to the board. So, but things that are reported include lack of cooperation when first referred, any non-compliance, all violations, any behaviors that give any concern of safety in patient care, and then successful closures of participant files when known to the board, but all unsuccessful participant file closures are provided to the board. Okay, yep, thanks. Next. And then I just kind of add this slide, things that we are talking about, you know, key restriction language, monitoring interruptions, international travel, anywhere drug, alcohol testing, and then issue specific monitoring agreements and requirements. Just because there's so many different, you know, I don't believe in a one size, me personally, I don't believe in a one size fits all. I really think, you know, we need to start really individualizing and looking at, oh, you are here because of mental health. There's never been any substance use issue. Mm-hmm. Why are we treating you like a substance use person? And this and that. So, and then we have a handful of participants with like sexual boundary issues. You know, it's different also with them. Like, I really feel like we need to individualize care and recommendations and all that. Okay, next.
So we've talked a lot of, can we stay on that slide for just a second? The changes to consider and discuss. We've talked about a lot of these today.
Yeah.
The key restrictions, I know as an investigative committee years ago, we used to mandate key restrictions, and that made it hard for KNAP because, you know, at some point in a person's rehabilitation, they need to have that opportunity to succeed or fail. And so by giving that back. So we as a committee have tended to stray away from mandating key restrictions and letting you all determine, you know, initially, I think many of them start with a key restriction and then at some point they gain that, that privilege back. And so then they get that exposure. So I don't know that we talked in length about that today, but I kind of wanted folks to understand what that one meant. We've talked a lot about monitoring interruptions and related to international travel specifically. And I appreciate what you're talking about with anywhere drug and alcohol testing. That makes sense to me. And I think just in this day and age and recognizing that we have a better opportunity to represent the western half of our our state, that anywhere drug testing with the issues that present there. Can you say a little bit more about the issue specific monitoring agreements and what would you like us to focus on with that?
Now I'm trying to think. I think it's really kind of, and oh, I remember Linda at NOAP, there are if I can get on here, there are some programs in the United States that like literally have specific tracks for like mental health. This is a mental health referral. So here's what's required for them. This is a substance use referral. It's going to be different, individualized. It's going to be different than for the mental health only. And that, you know, 90% of substance use has mental health, vice versa. But we also do have those that are just mental health, and there is not a substance use disorder attached to it. And so that's where I was going at, you know, or like the behavioral, the behavioral, I was trying to see if I could find
And that's helpful. I think that
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that, that I was fully understanding the opportunities that you're bringing forth for us to consider. So that makes sense.
Yeah, so chemically addicted and mental health, medical, and then at risk, which I'm not really sure what that means. But anyways, this was Arizona? Arizona
Yes.
shared this with me, and I was like, I just really like that
We
because
used you guys for this, to help us evaluate where they're at.
Yes.
Because you can go into the in-depth questionnaire that I think Dwayne talked about before. I believe I got his name right.
Dwayne, yeah.
What he had told us was that, you guys really do search out anything that we're not seeing because we haven't met them.
Yeah, exactly. So, anyways, that's kind of where I'm going at, is really finding a way to individualize, and like someone who is there mental health only, is key restriction really required? Kind of thing. I don't know. That's not my but that is our, my least favorite conversation is, oh, how am I supposed to find a job now? You'll find one. Like there's people out there, but
Well, there's some jobs that don't have access to narcotics.
anyways, and then they, how am I supposed to work this off if I never can?
Right.
So there's just all sorts of things. And this is where it would be nice to have Elizabeth here because she's got the almost 3 years experience now. So yeah.
You're doing great.
Oh, thank you. Anyways, I think that was it. I wanted to give an example of the anywhere, anytime drug testing though. A gal out in Western Kansas went, I don't know what happened, but then she was supposed to go do a blood test. But the site messed it up twice. The site messed it up twice. So here, now we don't have a test for a month and a half. So Elizabeth says, well, now you have to go do a hair follicle test. 2 hours to the nearest hair follicle test site.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, why is she being punished for something that the lab messed up on? And she's like, well, so it's a 4-hour round trip.
So in that case, does the licensee pay out of pocket each one? So for the first two that were,
They, I think, Affinity reimbursed or just didn't charge her again. But still, yeah, that's another thing to consider, because will the site is the lab site reimbursing her for what they charged her to do it?
right.
And how often is this site doing this to
Yeah.
people who are coming to them?
Yeah. So that's a great example of why something needs to change, because
Well, like I said before, Stephanie, we appreciate you being here. We appreciate the education and the knowledge. And I think, I don't know, I guess I'd kind of like to see maybe not every single quarter you having to present, but I think it is really helpful to hear from you and KNAP on a regular basis and just keep this relationship as strong as what it is.
Yeah,
We
because I know
really
it.
appreciate it. So.
Oh yeah. I'm in the article. My article made it into the newsletter, I guess. So working really hard on getting out there and just re-educating. I think there was a lot of drift between COVID and between the issues that KNAP has had over the last 4 years with leadership and change. There's just been a lot of drift, and going to these like the KONL, I've had so many calls just from that. Being on the KU Echo, I was able to connect with someone who presents at the Pitt State School of Nursing. And so now I'm scheduled to go out there in September during their leadership week. And so it's just getting out there, having tables, vendor tables, and but that all costs money, and we are strapped. And so it's trying to do everything we can.
We appreciate it.
I don't mind coming over here at all. I mean, I'm in Overland Park. It's an hour. It's not that hard to get over here. So I don't mind coming over here, as long as I know what I'm supposed to talk about.
What am I here for?
Wait, what? So,
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Okay, moving on in our agenda, I think we're down to our, let's take a break. It is 11 o'clock. I think we've been in here for 2 hours and I drank plenty of coffee this morning. So let's take a 10-minute break. Does that seem reasonable? We'll reconvene at 11:10.
Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so we are on to our, the 5-year regulatory review. And we really just, we're gonna talk about these disciplinary statute reviews. So, Linda, you may be able to give more detail. These statutes were revised a few years ago by a subcommittee.
I think the last time that the subcommittee met was in 2021, and then the drafts were created at that time, and then they were tabled for moving forward. So they're starting on page 80 in the packet. On page 91, because the LMHT also has, the LMHT Act also has their own disciplinary statutes and regs, but their language is a little different, and which reg goes and which statute kind of coincides with the language in the Nurse Practice Act. So I attempted to do a comparison chart between the Nurse Practice Act and the LMHT Act. So if you change one, kind of change the one that's similar in the LMHT, so you have some consistency. But that had not been done before. So that's kind of where we're at, is that this is where we left it. And so this is where we need to pick it back up from.
So based on that information, and then based upon the presentations that we've heard last quarter regarding an attorney and his perspective on what he was seeing throughout maybe other healthcare professions as well. And, you know, he made some comments about alternatives to discipline. And then we've heard these two presentations today about KNAP, and then also about remedial education and support. I think we probably need to spend some time really reading these regulations and digging into them in detail. It has been, you know, 5 years-ish since these recommendations were put together. So there's still validity to them, but I think we probably need to spend some time getting them up to date with the current thought processes, particularly specific to some of the education we've had recently. We did talk at our strategic planning retreat about potentially putting together a smaller committee to work on this, knowing my tenure on the board. I guess I'm going to pause a minute, let Adri and Brenda maybe give some direction or thought about how they'd like to see this go forward. It really can only be one board member to meet with some staff members if you want to. That's the way these revisions were initially developed, and then I think they would come back for review at the board. So that's an option. I think I think you could take all of these and look at them individually and then bring back for discussion at the board, at the committee next quarter is another option. That gets hard because it may take a lot of time within the committee meeting itself to go through the details and thoughts and perspectives. But Adri, Brenda, how would you like to see this handled?
Brenda, go first.
Well, I'm wondering, I think we've had the conversation before that when we go back to the legislature with requests to change statutes, we are also potentially opening up the opportunity for other amendments that are not coming from this board or that won't have an opportunity for review. So I think I would like to understand maybe better from Carol how these would be approached and requested so that we were doing everything we could to maintain their integrity and not have them become amended in the middle of the night in a legislative session with something that has not been vetted, or, we've been in a situation before where things get passed into statute that are in conflict, in fact, with other parts of the Nurse Practice Act. So I kind of want to know the why we're looking at it again now, and I don't, I definitely think that they need updated. I think we need to be very proactive in moving them forward, and I'd like to understand that plan before we put in a lot of additional time to revise and review.
This is Carol Moreland. I will just tell you, and the board really hasn't heard about this, but we have to take the statute back next year about fingerprints, and I can explain that more in the board meeting. So there will be one statute going over there for the next session, but it's going to be pretty minor, actually. I will just tell you, this is what I see. When you take a whole lot over there at one time, they don't really understand it all. They really don't. And so I think personally, I think it's better, you've got quite a few here. You do. And then when you talk about getting into the LMHT, you have to understand they don't really understand what LMHT is to start out with pretty much. So I guess what I'm saying is I wouldn't want to overwhelm them with like all these statutes. It's going to be really hard to explain these and the changes in the amount of time that we're given over there, which is not very much. They have a very short attention span. Usually testimony and stuff like that is rather short. I think just trying to increase their understanding as much as possible. I can't predict if something else will be done with them. I can't. I mean, I don't think there's any way that I can really do that. That's just probably my recommendation is don't take all these at once. If you feel like, I would just say, what's the priority here out of all of these? I think they're all important, but I think you're going to have to prioritize. And there's one, the impairment one, that we never had before. I can't find it right now, but I know it was a new one. It's actually on page 89. I think they can understand what an impaired provider is. I will tell you, as far as unprofessional conduct, that may be a little bit of a touchy subject because of some things. But I think impairment will be very upfront with them. I think they can understand what an impaired provider is. That's just my recommendation. I think you just have to look at things going on too and things like that. But
yeah, I agree with Carol. I think it's maybe our time is best spent initially prioritizing one or two that we would want to advance and then develop a very specific strategy and who's carrying that and how we're educating some of our members of the legislature and preparing someone to carry that for us so that it's received well and has the best possible chance of getting through unamended.
So in stating that, Brenda, would you like some time to review these to determine what your priority is, or do you feel like the impaired provider is the priority?
I think I want a little more time to review. I think impaired provider, I do think we've been talking about LMT for a very long time. I don't know if that one needs to kind of be put to bed or not. And I do think this diversion issue needs to be reviewed a bit more to just understand other professional licensure boards in our state and how common they are, again, so that we're prepared to say everybody else has this but us, or we're one of two that doesn't still have some kind of a defined remediation option. I feel like I need a little bit more time to know where we are relative to others.
Linda, is that something you could maybe look into and bring back? What do other boards, particularly within the state of Kansas, but then also maybe nursing boards from other states or our neighboring states would be interesting if they have any type of the remedial action or alternatives to discipline. And
Okay.
Are we on
I
the
know BOHA does, so that's probably our closest relative, but BOHA has a extensive remediation options, maybe in the opposite direction of where I would like to be, but
Carol, are we on a timeline for anything we need to get out now?
Well, if you're gonna take something over there in January,
really only have the September board.
yeah,
meeting.
the
You know, it
September
would have to be.
So Brenda could
would be.
review and give her, like I said, she's got so much experience
She does, yes, she
on the
does.
wide range. That's why I deferred to her, because I knew she'd nail it.
I mean, we're lucky in the fact that we have a board member who's a legislator, and that gives us a little bit. And I believe
exactly. Mhm.
I believe she was going to submit for a reappointment. So I haven't heard anything, but that is something very key over there, is that we have her.
Well, and I think to Brenda's concerns, I think that having her as a voice over there, you know, now may be a good time. So, you know, if you think about, there'll be the September board, September, and then a December board meeting. That's really the only two times. So, I mean, you'd have to see a draft by September to be able to finalize it in December to go to a January session. So, I mean, time is.
Yeah, and you're dealing with,
limited here.
you know, the reviser and all of that, who has to put all these together.
Mhm.
And so you would want to see the language that's gonna be in the bill in December,
Yes.
so that it would be ready to go. And so. you
So
have to
Carol,
look-
had any of these ever been touched by a reviser, or was this just the board's work?
I believe this
board and
is
staff.
just the board's work, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Okay, so, in light of that discussion, I'm anticipating that I won't be here. So how would you like to handle that?
Brenda, are you willing to work with them on the revisions, given your experience in that?
Well, I don't feel comfortable with my knowledge of Nurse Practice Act, being a public member that I'm not a nurse. I mean, I can read it all. I can look at all of that. I get more uncomfortable when it's something that's actually defining practice, and I would need somebody else's expertise. I'm happy to work with staff to develop a plan to prioritize these, maybe based on staff's opinion, and maybe our AG represent. I think we need to hear from our AG staff which ones they think are most pressing and most viable and feasible, and then maybe have some consultation with our government relations folks to decide which ones are less likely to be tacked on with something else next session. My sense is that they're going to try to get in and out of session fairly quickly next year without doing too much damage to anyone, because it's an election year that following year. So sometimes that can work in our favor, and then sometimes somebody has a point to make and they may want to use that legislation to make an example or something, or to carry something. So I think we just need some advice on what other things are out there and other ideas that members of the legislature have about nursing and nurses. So and I think board member Oropesa would be a good advisor to us on that as well.
Okay, so maybe for the next meeting, there could be some priorities set on which one there's going to be attention given to. So is that enough direction?
So what I'm hearing is that I will be visiting with Brenda and probably Carol as well, and setting priorities as to what they want to do next.
Probably disciplinary council, correct? I mean, they should probably be involved in this also.
Most definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. The LMHT regulations are here as well, and statutes, you know, and it has been a very long time since they've been touched. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with those over the next few months with the new state hospital. They've broken ground in the Wichita area, and so Carol, do you have?
Well, I just wanted to kind of follow up on that a little bit. One of the LMHT providers in the state has relinquished theirs, so we're down one program. And I do believe, I think it's coming out of education that they've had a task force to kind of look at LMHT. Because if the decision is made to continue the way it is and stuff, we're gonna have to do something different with the exam and all of that. So I know there's a task force that was kind of looking at a few things in education. And I do believe it's on the agenda for tomorrow. So there might be some.
So that may give
report back.
direction to
Yeah,
where these
okay.
statutes need to go. So it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see how this week's committees play out.
Okay.
Okay. I think we'll move on now. I know that we are planning for a executive session. I think this is probably a good time for that.
Okay.
See.
And that would be that one. Or is that just
No.
this one? Okay. This one.
Yes.
And
20 minutes,
20 minutes.
and we'll reconvene at 11:45.
Okay. Andrew Goldsmith, board member. Pursuant to KSA 75419B2, I move that the investigation committee recess into executive session for 20 minutes and reconvene at 11:45 a.m. The meeting will be reconvened by Zoom and in room suite 1051 KSBN Library, Landon Office Building, 900 Southwest Jackson, Topeka, Kansas 66612, as stated in the notice of the meeting that was sent to individuals who requested the notice, and as published on the board's website at www.ksbn.kansas.gov. The justification for this consultation with the board's legal counsel, Assistant Attorney General Sydney Winslow, Samantha Harrington, and Rachel Kinsey McCownson, that would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship. The subject matter to be discussed in the executive session concerns legal issues related to litigation, updates on disciplinary cases, and disciplinary counsel process.
Sharp, second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. So for discussion, I would like to propose adding Carol Moreland as the executive director to the executive session.
I second that.
So if we can amend that motion and add Carol Moreland.
Do I need to read that part or just
No,
write it
I
in?
think
I accept that friendly amendment and can second that.
Thank you.
This is Charles. You'll just need to make sure that's added to the written motion.
Yes.
Thank you, Charles. Yeah, we are,
Okay,
Adri's doing that right now, so.
Okay.
make
I've
sure.
got to be
Carol Moreland
current,
to be
okay,
added.
to be added. Okay.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying yes.
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 Any opposed signify by saying no. Motion carries.
I'll go get.
Okay.
Okay, so we are back in open session now at the conclusion of our executive session. So I think we are moving on in our agenda. We are ready for quasi judicial if there is a motion.
I do. After go from board member, I move that the meeting of the investigation committee be closed to deliberate on matters relating to decisions involving the exercise of quasi judicial functions as authorized by KSA 2013 supplement 7.754318
Sharp,
motion?
second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying yes.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. We have concluded our quasi judicial, so I think we have some motions that we need to make.
Andrew Goldsmith, board member, I move that the investigation committee find the following cases be closed for the reason that no action is needed.
We have a motion.
Sharp, second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying yes.
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 Any opposed signify by saying no. Motion carries.
I move that the investigation committee find that reasonable grounds exist for believing the applicant or licensee is guilty of violating the Kansas Nurse Practice Act in the following cases, and those cases will be continued for further proceedings conducted in accordance with provision of the Kansas Administrative Procedure Act.
Sharp, second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying yes.
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 Any opposed signify by saying no. Motion carries.
I move that the investigation committee approve by consensus the case disposition represented on the spreadsheet entitled Unlicensed Practice.
Sharp, second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Any opposed signify by saying no. Motion carries.
I move that the investigation committee approve by consensus the case disposition represented on the spreadsheet titled Cases Not Open.
Sharp, second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying yes.
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 Any opposed signify by saying no. Motion carries.
I move that the investigation committee approve by consensus the case disposition represented on the spreadsheet titled New Grads.
Sharp, second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying yes.
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 Any opposed signify by saying no. Motion carries.
I move that the investigation committee approve by consensus the case disposition represented on the spreadsheet titled Inactivated by Staff.
Sharp, second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying yes.
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 Any opposed signify by saying no. Motion carries.
Oh, sorry. I move that the investigation committee approve by consensus the case disposition represented on the spreadsheet titled Endorsement Applications.
Sharp, second.
Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Any opposed signify by saying no. Motion carries.
I move that the investigation committee approve by consensus the case disposition represented on the spreadsheet titled Conversions.
Sharp, second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying yes.
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 Any opposed signify by saying no. Motion carries.
I move that the investigation committee approve by consensus the case disposition represented on the spreadsheet titled Reinstatement Applications.
Sharp.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying yes.
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 Any opposed signify by saying no. Motion carries.
And that ends the motions.
So for our agenda for the September committee meeting, I think Brenda's gonna talk with Linda and maybe set some priorities for the disciplinary statutes and the LMHT statutes. There'll be additional information following the education committee. We discussed that. Continue to look at ways to include alternatives to discipline and some of the things that we've been hearing about recently. Anything else we need to add? I do really appreciate that executive session, and I think that process can continue if that's helpful.
I like it.
I agree.
Okay.
Did you want to hear from KNAP again? We're gonna meet and discuss what we've learned and any update. You want me to just bring an update to you?
I
with
think if
KNAP?
you bring the update, that's my opinion.
Okay.
I'm kind of projecting myself, Adri, Brenda. I think seeing some of the drafted changes to that contract would be helpful to the committee, but I'm comfortable. I would be comfortable hearing from you,
Okay.
assuming
I will be.
Okay,
Yeah, I would prefer just to not maybe have another presentation, just given our volume and just see the proposed changes.
Okay, so with that information, we will adjourn.
did you still want me to check with other regulatory agencies as what they have to offer and things like that nature as well? Bring all
I
of
think
that back
that
to you?
would be great
All at
as
one time?
we start looking through those, the statutes and the regulations and taking into consideration what other healthcare regulatory bodies in the state of Kansas are doing, and then sister state nursing bodies are doing.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, my sense is what will be most compelling is what's happening in this state. My experience with this group is they don't really like comparing us to other states. We like this, radical individualism sometimes. I don't know. So I would be really interested in what other boards, if they have these and if we're an outlier in any way, because I think that will be the most compelling argument.
Great, thanks, Brenda. Okay, and with that, do I need a motion for that? Okay, with that, we will adjourn the June meeting of the investigative committee. So thank you very much.